Thank you for coming back in a timely manner too. We've got a few changes to the schedules, and we're going to kick off with a panel discussion on artificial intelligence with Sean Murphy and Dr. Scott Hollier, and I'll hand over to them now.
Thank you, Jerry. My name's Sean Murphy. I'm from Cisco Systems. I'm also part of the Human Rights Commission Expert Reference Group for Future Technology Project. And the whole project is focusing on technology of the future. AI is one area that we're very heavily, the HRC is very focusing on quite intensely, because it's a major social impact. I was asked early in the year to talk about, write a paper on accessibility and how it will impact or benefit the disabled community. So I asked Scott to join in on that paper, because I've seen him do another paper on IoT, to get him to come and give us some information. So I'm just going to kick it off, and I'll let Scott to introduce his bit about IoT in a second, because I want us to set the foundation for AI. Now, today is what we're doing is more of a fireside chat, and we really just want to get your input as well at the end if we have time. And hopefully we will. Okay, so I was going to use my computer, but knowing technology and how things go, it died. And, okay, so artificial intelligence. It is a hype. It's a real hype in the media today. I'm not going to talk about the theory behind artificial intelligence. I'm going to use an analogy, because I prefer analogies than actually talking about the heavy theory, because a lot of people get that. So when you're a kid, I pick you up. You're only 1 or 2. You don't know the language. You don't know much at all, because your brain's a sponge, and you're learning things. I shove you in a dark room. Envisage this. There's no windows. There's no lights. And I'm telling you, red, I show you a picture of blue. But I'm telling you it's red. I do that multiple times. Then I show you another picture. I show you a dog, and I'll tell you it's a cat. This goes on for a period of time. Then this young poor child that's been brainwashed by me, oh, that sounds good. And I'm showing my evil side. Anyway, so what's happening, that kid comes out, you show them the colour blue, they'll say red. No, hang on, that's blue. AI is like that. AI is just an algorithm that can make decisions via very smart software coding. You pump it heaps of data, it can just come up with a decision and give you some form of result. For example, if you're using something like facial recognition, it can recognise that person. So I just want to use that analogy. If you give it the right data, you'll get the right results. If you give the bad data, you get the bad results. So I'm going to pass it over to Scott now, and he's going to talk about his favourite topic, IoT.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Sean. When Sean proposed this talk, he said, I'd really like to do a fireside chat. So I said, okay, well, you bring the questions and I'll bring the fire. So I have my little laptop next to me with fireside, I think it's about an hour-long YouTube video. I had no idea there were so many fireplace videos on YouTube, but I do now. So look, when it comes to Internet of Things, my background is I did a research project with Curtin in 2017 looking at how students and what they wanted from their education and how IoT might apply to it, which was a great research project to be involved in. Interesting thing with Internet of Things is that the term was arguably coined by Kevin Ashton in 1999, and he made the point that big data is something that humans don't do very well. We only have to see in elections that we often have to have recounts and things, because when we do try to count up big data, it's really tricky. So it makes sense to have things like sensors and actuators to deliver data, to then compile it in a way that makes sense to us, that we can use. And that's really where the AI aspect comes in. We interact with our devices like Google Home or Amazon Echo And it feels like we can just ask things, but really what's going on is data is being pulled from all over the place and being put in a way that we can understand. I think one important thing to note though is that IoT and this whole concept of engaging with our devices isn't something new. Dick Tracy comics have been having what's arguably the smartwatch since the 1930s. So next time you're in an Apple store and someone says, look at our amazing new Apple Watch, you can mention it, actually the concept's 80 years old, and I wish you all the best with that conversation. So just to briefly touch on the education implications, there's quite a few things that students have looked at in terms of what they would like in terms of AI. And one of the big ones that came out was that a number of students have said, look, the lecturer writes things up on a smartboard and I have my device on me. Why can't the content from the smartboard be converted into something that can come straight to my device or my learning management system, so I can use my screen reader, I can use assistive technologies. So, and yeah, I mean, we have all the technology to do that. So this is just one of those ideas that came through in the research and does pose interesting questions about what we can do to harness this technology to make it more accessible. Sean?
So, picking out what Scott has said, I'm a very simple guy, cynical but simple. So, if you look at technology and you're talking about AI, there's three ways AI I've seen from my research and searching around the net that's been applied for disabled people, specifically to the disabled person. So they get the AI and they say, oh, this is a good solution. This is going to solve the disabled person's problems, without consulting the disabled person in the first place, and they produce a product. Then they have the disabled person finds a mainstream product and say, oh hell, that Google Echo, or sorry, I just merged two products together, the Google Home and the Amazon Echo and other similar products. I think, wow, I can't turn on the lights myself. I want to control my air conditioning. Now, this is stuff that you guys you do when you automate your home. They can do. So they're adapting mainstream products to become assistive technology. Then you've got all the other crap out there, all the other mainstream technology that can that disabled person use? That's the question I'm throwing at you to think about. Can that technology that's based on AI, can they use? One thing I didn't mention in the AI component is there's three areas. The human interaction, the actual algorithms that do it, and all the deep learning and the narrow learning and all the other theoretical models they use out there, and the data. So at that point, I'm just going to leave it there. I'm going to pass it back to Scott, and I want him to talk about education and dig and expand upon that in a bit more depth. So once he's done his thing, I'm going to talk about consumer products, and so is Scott, and then we're going to move into more employment. And let's see where we go from there.
Excellent. Thanks, Sean. So in terms of the students and their feedback, as I was saying, there was that one good example in terms of connecting a smart board to our everyday devices. There are a few other things that really came out in the literature and the feedback, and there have been some studies done where in real time, if we use Internet of Things and some AI algorithms, as a lecturer is delivering a workshop or something education related, there was some studies done where devices regarding students' attention and breathing and things like that were attached to the students, and likewise something similar attached to the lecturer, and actually found that they could very closely monitor at what point students started to get a little dozy and stop paying attention, and they could then in real time alert the lecturer to this happening, and then that lecturer could start changing their approach to be more engaging. And so this was another thing that was really interesting, and the students in the research were very keen to see something like that take place. Another suggestion by the students is around particularly people who are deaf and hearing impaired, and the use of things like Google Home. The students made the point that if you can dictate to your smartphone an SMS message and easily send that off, then why is it that we can't use something similar in the classroom to make sure that all our content is captioned? Is it possible for a lecturer to say, wear a microphone and have something like Google Home be able to create real-time automated captions with a reasonable accuracy, and just have them immediately going up on the screen, or again, being sent straight to the device of a student who's hearing impaired. And there's a lot of argument over how accurate automated captions are these days. But it's fair to say that if we do have the conditions set right, it can be a very powerful tool. And there are some unis doing some investigation into this already. But that's just a few examples of the education implications. There's also around navigating around campus. If you ever try to navigate, or if you've ever seen Curtin University's wheelchair campus map, I think you just about need a hunting dog and a Ouija board to effectively make it work for you. But if you had the right technologies and more support around being able to get in and out of buildings with access, using IoT and GPS navigating, then it's a lot more effective in providing that support. And again, it's really about putting that the layer of technologies around and the AI to interact with them to make it work. Sean, back to you.
So consumer technology, oops, yeah, I don't want to yell. Consumer technology. Now, we all like our gadgets. Actually, question, does anyone not like their gadgets? So I have an Amazon Echo Home, and I've got other technology out there. And I've got my new washing machine, I've got my new hi-fi, and I come along as a disabled person, and I suddenly realise I can't use it. So IoT allows me, if it's done correctly, to interact with it. And I can just use that web interface like yourselves. So I can start, like there's a new microwave out there by LG, which you can yell at, and say, go and cook my egg and watch it explode. Or go and make my donut so I can bounce it off the wall. All those sort of things I used to do when I was a young kid, when microwaves came out. And I thought, great. But, you know, there's sort of things that we can do in consumer products. There's technology that people are using in wheelchairs to allow them to control their wheelchair. And they're using mainstream technology, and they're using self-driving car technology to drive around. There's people who are visually impaired who are using it to control their lights in the house and things of that nature for a consumer. There's other technology out there allowing people to control their computers, and they're just pulling some mainstream consumer type products off the market and adapting to what they want to do. So there's a lot of opportunities out there, and in some of the examples which was presented in the keynote speaker this morning demonstrates that. There's people being innovative in trying to make, using this great possible technology. There's a downside. There's all, you know, technology has a positive and a negative. So some of the negatives due to the consumer side is privacy, biased data. I can't bloody use it. So I'm a person going internationally and I go up to a passport, a facial recognition machine, and I have a facial can't say the word now. I have a deformity in my face, I have a false eyes, and the technology, or I can't get that field of my eyes in the field at the little square on the screen to look into it so it can recognise me, and suddenly you can't use that technology. Suddenly there's a barrier for that person. So that's just one real life example that's out there. Scott, do you have any others in this sort of area?
Well, I think it's worth just pulling together the fact that, as Sean said, there are just so many benefits more broadly. So, for example, you know, in this day and age, as long as my smartphone has internet connection, I don't have to worry about being lost. And as a legally blind person, that's terrific. And even just for your everyday things, I mean, I'm in Sydney and I like junk food, maybe a little too much junk food. And but the great thing is that I can pull up an app on my phone, and I can go to food places. It will then tell me where the nearest food places are, and it can then navigate me to those food places. And the amount of data that has to come together to make all that possible is quite remarkable. And there are those very practical needs. But as Sean mentioned, there is downside, and privacy and security are big ones. I mean, if someone was malicious, it would be very easy to hijack me and take me to a health food store or something. And you know, it's there are potentials to make things tricky. And you know, whilst I take it lightheartedly, you know, there could be malicious things. So, for example, if someone relied heavily on had a medical condition where the medicine had to be refrigerated at a particular temperature, it wouldn't be too hard to hack into a fridge, lower the temperature, spoil the medicine, put it back to what it was, and you'd never know. And so there are, as we see all these great benefits for the technologies, we also do have to be mindful that unfortunately there can be sinister people out there, and yeah, we need to always be vigilant in that area too.
Scott, you just given me a new project to give you that health application without you knowing. So if you talk about the employment world, it's a big problem. Now, it's already been stated this morning, which is beautifully aligned, because I had no idea what the keynote speakers, Microsoft, David and co, were going to talk about. Employment is one of my passions, is that the disabled people in this country and around the world is not as much in the workforce as it could. There are articles out there saying, AI is going to make this whole revolution improvements. There is some software out there which I've seen, which Salesforce and Google and Microsoft are producing, and other companies are producing. And one of the technologies which really blew my mind away, which I can use, you can use, and people who have difficulty absorbing information, which it's primarily designed for, can use. It takes a whole news article and condenses it down to one paragraph or one line. So think about all that information you guys are receiving, and you can condense that down even more. Some other technology I've seen which I was really excited about is sign language, or I call the babelfish, but sign language that can interpret your spoken word and give that person who's deaf and only understands sign language, because it's their native language, and they can start communicating with you without having that third person. Other technology is, Siri or Google Assist or Amazon Echo or the half a dozen other out there that are out there doing this sort of stuff. It's using AI behind it. Old voice recognition software didn't. It used a statistical model, but now they're moving to AI to make it much easier. Now, I've had in my organisation people asking me via my customers, is there any software out there that can translate from one language to another? Yes, there is. There's software out there now people are working on to allow you to do voice recognition in a conference and bring it back into text. So this amazing stuff that's coming out there. Likewise, and I call it the dark side, but anyway, on the dark side is that technology has a challenge if the human interaction for a disabled person isn't done right. Now, I'm talking to a lot of converted people here, but that's the message out there. If you are going to develop a new product, and that product doesn't have the right human interaction, regardless what the product is, if it's in the middle of the street and it's an information kiosk, or it's a piece of a mobile app or a desktop app or a web app or whatever it is, if it's not properly designed and you're thinking of all the customer base, not the majority, therefore you're going to put barriers, and the social change, which is our Discrimination Act is all about, will not occur. Scott.
Yeah, just to build on that, a good example is the Amazon Echo Show, which has now made that screen interaction in a way that supports people who are deaf or hearing impaired. So you can effectively access pretty much the same things that you could do verbally, and receiving the verbal feedback you can now do by screen interactions, and there are alerts that can flash on the screen and things like that to get your attention. Moving forward in the employment space, I mean, it's not too far away where it's likely we could turn up into an office, and what greets us is something like an Amazon Echo Show, is that initial greeting. So it's really important going forward that when we do consider access implications, that we do make sure that whoever walks into that room and interacts with that device, that all the functionality of that device can be accessed regardless of disability. And so that will have profound impacts on our workplace and employment as time goes on. Yep.
So the final question and comment we're going to talk about is governance. We all like to be governed and, controlled and regulated, don't we? Or do we? Okay, so there are some gaps in our laws. In the DDA, there's some gaps in there in relation to technologies. Well, I'd argue if the DDA has done an effective job in improving closing the gap for accessibility for the disabled community. I'd argue our Telecommunication Act hasn't kept up. The USA in 2010 have done major improvements in their act to try and ensure that disabled people are still included in the technology. I still think there's gaps there. Are there other regulations and stuff out there which should be reinforced to ensure that when a person with a disability, and think about it, and with some stats that came out yesterday, we all are, or hopefully we all don't, but some of us are going to end up with disabilities when we're older, and you want to go and use your favourite washing machine, and we don't have laws enforcing or incentives to encourage companies out there to do the right thing and making sure they're getting the full market. Not the 80% of the market, the whole 100% of the market. So that's the sort of things, I feel very strongly that, we have gaps in, and that's some of the stuff that the project that I'm involved with on the reference group, they're looking into and seeing what can we do? How can we change look at the different ways of improving things and trying to work out how can the governance or encouragements or whatever other processes we can do to try and close that gap for the accessibility and other areas that are related to the whole project, which I'm not going to take any thunder from the presentation tomorrow. Anyway, on to that point, Scott, do you have anything else to add to that?
I need to reiterate that the Disability Discrimination Act of 1992 has no specific reference to ICT, and I think it's long overdue that that's updated. So that's something which I know Sean and myself and many people here have been trying to get addressed. And fingers crossed, the more we have these discussions, that will happen at some point.
Now,
sorry, Sean and Scott. Thank you very much for the presentation. We've just got 1 minute to go.
Yeah.
Well, perfect timing.
I think that's it.
Yes, that is it. The next thing is questions. So I'm going to throw out there and think about and come and talk to us and talk about yourselves. Future technology. What do you think's over the horizon? So what I would like is a robotic dog like K9 from Doctor Who. Exactly like K9 from Doctor Who.